Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. I'm Matt Hartsky, and today we're digging into one of the most overlooked but rewarding hunts in the West, pronghorn antelope hunting on public land. This isn't a hunt you can fake your way through. These animals aren't just fast, they see everything. They move often, and they cover country in minutes that takes you hours. But with the right plan, the right approach, and some earned patience, you can make this one of the most exciting and humbling hunts of your year. In this episode, I'm walking you through the exact tips and strategies I've learned through boots on the ground experience chasing speed goats across open public country for 33 years, where there are no fences to trap them and no shortcuts to success. We'll break down scouting, terrain usage, buck selection, optic work, rifle versus archery strategies, and what I call earned stalks. If you're a DIY hunter trying to fill a pronghorn tag without the help of guides or private ground, this one's for you. Let's start with what matters most, scouting. And I don't just mean e-scouting. I'm talking about layered recon, digital, physical, and behavioral. Before I step foot in a unit, I've already spent hours in onX. I'm not just marking water sources and fences. I'm looking at road pressure, walk-in zones, terrain rolls, and glassing vantages. I pay special attention to chunks of BLM or state ground that require some boot work to access, not just easy to drive through. The more remote it feels to the average hunter, the better chance I have of finding antelope that haven't been spooked into private. Once I get on the ground, I switch to observation mode. My first few outings, especially pre-season, I'm watching, not chasing. I want to know where they feed, where they bed, what times they water, and how they use the wind and terrain. Pronghorn are habitual, but they're also reactive. They adjust quickly when the pressure hits. I keep a detailed log, written and mental, of where bucks show up consistently, how they group, how long they stay in one area, and how they respond when someone drives past at 400 yards. This kind of patterning is gold on public land, where every mistake echoes across the prairie. I'll also take special note of travel corridors. Pronghorn use the path of least resistance, and they have favorite trails, fence gaps, and crossings, and old two-tracks they walk regularly. If you can figure out these patterns, you're not guessing where to go, you're predicting. And when you can predict antelope behavior on public land, you're ahead of 90% of the pressure. Don't overlook water either. It's not always about sitting water for a shot, but water is a magnet in dry climates. If you can find a remote tank that isn't getting hit by every truck in the unit, glass it from a distance. You might not shoot a buck there, but it might give you the perfect observation point to pattern one nearby. Most hunters glass from the truck and then chase the first buck they see. That's not a plan, that's gambling. A true public land antelope hunter watches with intention, learns the landscape like a map in their head, and only moves when the odds tip in their favor. Now that you've found antelope, let's talk about which ones are actually worth going after. Here's what separates the seasoned hunter from the hopeful one, knowing the difference between a visible buck and a killable buck. I see it every year. Guys spot a good buck in the open and immediately try to stalk. But if that buck is surrounded by does, 800 yards off the road with zero cover between you and him, or the wind's wrong, you're just wasting daylight. I only make a move if I see a few key elements come together. The buck is in a location with contour or vegetation I can use. The wind is either consistent or rising thermals away from the buck that I can use to my advantage getting in there. There's a way to move into position without breaking skyline. And most importantly, he's not staring me down while I try to plan my route. If he's got me pegged, I'm probably done unless somehow I can get to cover or a big drainage or something that's going to break me up for a while and he's going to forget about it. Sometimes this means I watch a buck for hours. Sometimes it's even going back for days on public land especially. It pays to wait for the buck to make a mistake, not for you to force something. And here's the mindset shift. I don't chase antelope. I hunt for the moments that are most likely to work. If a buck beds on a cut bank with a crosswind and one exit route, that's a moment. If he's following a fence that funnels him towards a section corner with some sage and elevation change, that's a moment. You don't need 10 stalks a day. You need one smart stalk on a buck who doesn't know you're there. You also want to pay attention to how bucks use pressure. On public land, they often push to fence lines or hover near terrain that gives them more visibility in all directions. A smart buck is going to post up where he can see you before you see him. That's why picking a killable buck also means picking one who's either alone or slightly distracted or situated in terrain that works to your advantage. And sometimes the biggest bucks aren't the hardest to kill. They're just the ones that make the fewest mistakes. So when they do screw up, you've got to be ready. Let's talk terrain. This is where most antelope hunters fall apart. They don't know how to use the terrain, and it costs them shots they never even get the chance to take. Pronghorn country looks flat from a distance, but if you spend enough time out there, you'll start to notice micro contours that change everything. Little erosion lines, slight depressions, sage flats with a 2-foot dip running the length of them. These are gold when you're trying to close distance. I've crawled entire stalks in knee-high sage using a 6-inch ridge for cover. I've circled 2 miles just to get behind a buck bedded 400 yards from a water tank. Most guys would have charged right in and blown him out. This kind of terrain work takes time, but that's the deal with public land antelope. You can't outrun them. You can't out-hide them, but you can outthink them. Wind plays into this too. I treat it like terrain, something to be managed and manipulated. I don't just need the wind to be in my favor. I need it to stay that way. If the buck is bedded in a draw with shifting wind from 2 directions, I wait. And when I lose visual, whether I'm crawling or circling, I'm constantly marking where that buck was last seen. I don't just guess. I build a plan in my head. I use the landmarks. I use my map, distances, elevation. The difference between an educated stalk and a blind one, a filled tag. Also, pay attention to where the sun is. Light reflection off a watch face, your sunglasses, or even a sweaty forehead can bust a stalk before it even starts. I choose my approach based on light just as much as I do wind and terrain. Shadows, glare, and even heat shimmer can give away movement. The more invisible you are, the better chance you have of beating one of the sharpest sets of eyes in North America. When it comes to hunting speed goats, weapon choice changes everything. If you're rifle hunting, your effective range is usually at least a few hundred yards, depending on your comfort and setup. That range opens a lot of doors, but it doesn't mean the stalk is easy. In fact, it can trick you into rushing. I've seen guys spot a buck from 600 yards, see that he's in a shootable position, and go full send in 10 minutes, only to spook the whole herd and never get closer than 500. They are a much smaller target than they appear to be when they're on the hoof. The best rifle stalks I've had came from treating them like archery stalks. Slow, deliberate, and with a strong emphasis on wind and position. I treat every rifle setup like it could fall apart if I rush, because oftentimes it will. I practice for prone shots off a pack or bipod, side hill kneeling shots, steep uphill rest positions, and even sitting against my pack or uneven terrain. I bring a rear support, something soft but stable. I dial my scope dope well before season, and I confirm zero at various ranges with real-world wind conditions. In Wyoming, it's windy most of the time, so always trying to practice under those conditions, because when the time comes, you want that shot to be automatic, not a guess. I also factor in time to target. Even a perfectly dialed shot can go bad with a quartering crosswind if you haven't accounted for your environment correctly. Understand the effects of wind at different distances and elevations. This is key. A steady 5-mile-per-hour crosswind at 300 yards will remove most bullets just under a half a foot, depending on your caliber. At 450, you're talking a serious drift. Know your ballistics and know your limits. A bad hit on an antelope rarely results in recovery. These animals don't bleed well. They're very good at running on 3 legs. They don't leave heavy sign, and they can cover country at 50 miles an hour like you wouldn't believe, even when they're injured. Respect the shot. Now for bow hunting, it's a different beast entirely. I've hunted antelope with a bow on public land many, many times, and I'll say this, you will earn every yard. One of the best challenges out there in bow hunting. I've used blinds over water, and yes, they work, but you better be ready to sit all day, sometimes days on end, and in the heat, in the silence. In that situation, you've got to bring extra water and a whole lot of patience. Bring mental endurance. Pronghorn can be spooky, and once you get busted at a water hole, that setup might be burned for good. They'll remember. And not every water hole is equal. Some are cattle magnets and will bring in unwanted attention. Others dry up halfway through your hunt. I prefer water holes with some topography around them, something that allows me to sneak in and out without skylining myself. If you have time, trail cameras can help, but they're not a magic solution. Time in the blind is what makes or breaks a water hole hunt. My preferred approach though, spot and stalk with precision timing. That means waiting for the buck to bed, identifying wind you can trust, and then making a slow, careful approach. That slow, careful approach, it might take hours just to cover 80 yards. I'll study the buck's body language for 30 minutes before I move. Is he facing uphill or downhill? Is his head in the sun or the shade? Is he alert or heavy-eyed and flicking flies with his ears? These clues are going to help you decide when and how to make your move. If he gets up early, you abort. If the wind shifts, you abort. Bow hunting antelope is a chess match in a wide open country with 1,000 variables. And once you're inside range, that's when the real test begins. You don't have the luxury of drawing behind a tree. You may have to hold at full draw for over a minute. You may have to draw crouched, then rise. You may never get a shot at all. And you have to be okay with that because ethical bow hunting means saying no more than you say yes. For archers, everything matters. Noise, scent, angles, shadows, your draw cycle, and even the position of the sun relative to the buck's eyes. If you can find a slight rise to come over with the sun at your back and the buck unaware, you're doing it right. If your boots squeak or your quiver rattles, fix it well before season. If you haven't practiced shooting from your knees in a crosswind and you're coming out west to Wyoming, do it now. I also recommend carrying a lightweight decoy for certain situations. It doesn't always work, but during the peak of the rut and when you're dealing with curious bucks on lightly pressured ground, flashing a decoy from cover can give you the 10 seconds you need. It's not a guaranteed tactic, but it's another tool in your toolbox. And when it works, when you get inside 50 yards of one of these wily pronghorn with 8x vision on the ground, you didn't pay a dime to access. It's one of the most rewarding experiences in Western hunting. When I've used a decoy most successfully, it hasn't necessarily been where he straight up can see that decoy and I'm working towards him. It's usually when I try to stalk in and I want him completely unaware, even up to the time that I shoot. But I've gotten into position before where it came down to the point where I needed him to be able to see me at some point, or there was a risk of him seeing me when I drew, when I knelt up out of a ditch, whatever it may be. And that decoy, I could tell, rather than him just seeing a man kneel up there, when he saw the decoy, it made him stop and think, and it gave me time to make it happen. Now, pronghorn hunting isn't so rewarding because it's the easiest thing out there, but because every step, every crawl, every pause was intentional, especially with the bow, because you beat These animals built to detect threats across the prairie, and you did it the hard way. There's a reason pronghorn get overlooked. They don't bugle, they don't shed antlers, they're not known for giant body size, but if you think they're easy, you've never hunted them the right way. Public land antelope hunting will test your scouting, your patience, your shooting, and your attitude. It'll humble you fast and reward you slow, but it'll also give you a chance to grow as a hunter in ways elk or deer never will. You'll learn to move with the wind, to glass smarter, to stalk more patiently, to shoot precisely under hard conditions. These are the things that make us better, not just at hunting, but at living with discipline. So if you're going to go after your first pronghorn buck, or you're just trying to do it better than last year, remember this. You don't need to rush. You don't need to chase every opportunity. You need one good moment, one good wind, and one good plan. And if you do it right, when it's all over, you're packing out across that endless prairie, you're going to know you earned it. If this episode gave you something useful, something real, please share it with a hunting buddy. That's how we grow in the Backbone movement. If you want even more access to strategy, breakdowns, training resources, exclusive content, and a crew of driven hunters pushing to live relentlessly, join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com. We're building something different, something tougher, something earned. Until next time, hunt hard, become a speed goat killer, never settle.